We've all experienced that awful feeling knowing you're going to be late for an important appointment because you've already spent 20 minutes looking for a parking bay. Or we might have paid expensive parking fees or even risked a parking fine for the sake of convenience. You may have even given up your plan to catch public transport through lack of station parking or late buses. Is the parking situation in Perth reaching a crisis point? Or do we simply need to discover the right way to get the most out of our public transport and parking facilities? The Perth City Council, through the City of Perth Parking, is currently the largest parking provider in Western Australia and the third largest in Australia. The council manages 10,000 off-street and 5,200 on-street parking bays, while the severity of the parking situation remains a matter of opinion.
There's some 15,000 parking bays, both a combination of on the streets and off the streets. And people choose to use those bays according to their needs. And we find we're running around about 85 to 90% occupancy during the weekdays now.
Parking is atrocious. There are never enough bays and it is horribly, ridiculously expensive.
The interesting twist is that the Perth City Council has also publicly discussed their intentions to prioritise pedestrians and public transport access to the city centre, actively seeking to reduce the number of vehicles.
The recent upgrading of the St George's Terrace, you might have noticed that that's really fantastic now. We've widened the footpaths and put in new lighting and things like that. The recent mall reconstruction. So the city's been able to, through its parking fund, finance larger and more capital programs than otherwise it could necessarily do.
This raises significant issues for motorists.
I think all motorists are finding it more and more difficult to find both accessible and cheap parking, particularly in the Perth CBD. Our economy is growing strongly, our population is growing strongly, but parking spaces or the number of parking spaces simply aren't increasing. So it's difficult at the moment, but it's only going to get more and more difficult.
I need to run in and out of classes. Why not use a multi-storey car park? Well, if you start later than 9 o'clock, trying to get one of those parks is virtually impossible. So you're forced to use expensive on-the-street parking.
My thoughts on parking in the city, I'm not allowed to use four-letter words. But let me tell you, these things here are a pain in the proverbial...
So how do parking prices in Perth stack up? The parking rate survey released by Colliers International in 2010 listed Perth in the top 10 most expensive cities to park worldwide, ahead of even New York, whereas London is at number 1 with Sydney at number 7, Perth at 8 and Brisbane is the third Australian city to make it to the top 20, coming at number 15. The price of Perth parking is certainly a concern for commuters. People are finding it more difficult and expensive to park within the CBD. The cost is becoming an increasingly most important issue for the general public.
There are both what we call short-term bays for people coming in to stay a short period of time. Then we have the long-term bays where people come in to work and maybe stop for 10 hours for the day. Now, the number of bays we currently have, the city has some 15,000 parking bays, both a combination of on the streets and off the streets.
On the street parking is $3.10 or something per 2-hour blocks. You can only stay for 2 hours and you need to move your car. It's a nightmare.
One of the biggest changes to Perth parking in recent years was the state government's introduction of hefty parking levy in 2009. The move caused an outcry, and while the parliamentary committee determined the hike was legal, it specified that millions of dollars in extra revenue amassed each year must be used to fund transport initiatives.
Are RAC members happy with the affordability of the Perth City parking?
I think motorists are concerned about the cost of motoring in general. Cars are becoming more expensive, petrol's becoming more expensive, and obviously parking is becoming more expensive. There are some surveys which say that we have some of the most expensive parking in the world. There's some questions about the methodology behind some of those surveys, but I think if you ask the average motorist, yes, they are concerned about firstly the accessibility of parking and secondly the actual cost of it. It's going up, and Because of the demand of the economy, it's only going to rise more.
The council and the state government need to consider how to improve public transport in and out of the city. By then, people will have more options than simply driving their car.